Get ready for a very special Saturday evening on BBC One. At 10 to 6, join the staff of Brace Brothers, where Mr Humphreys isn't feeling quite his normal self. Gabby Roslin's in the chair at 6:20, with this week's crop of Chance of a Lifetime prizes to be won. Then, be a part of the action as Anthea and Patrick host the National Lottery Big Tickets. And at 8...
It's that time of the year when the whole of Europe gets together.
Yes, we'll be live from the National Indoor Arena in Birmingham with contestants from 25 countries. It's going to be quite a party.
With Imani performing the UK's Eurovision Song Contest entry. That's the lineup for Saturday evening on BBC One.
Ian wants to be a stripper.
Most women are well behaved. There is the odd one who just grab hold of it, tries dragging you around with it.
Ben wants to make it big.
They just know it's going to happen.
I'm a rock and roll star!
And Laura wants money, fast.
The reason I'm doing it is to support myself, to go to college. It doesn't leave very much to the imagination.
From the city where everyone's got a story, Made in Manchester tells it like it is. Starting Monday at 11:15 on BBC Two.
Now on BBC One, David Dimbleby with Vote 98.
Tonight we'll discover the voters' verdict on Tony Blair's first year in government, as we get the results of local elections that have been taking place across much of England. And we'll be looking to see whether Labour can retain its stranglehold over the north, despite some accusations of corruption, whether the Tories can begin to paint the map blue again, after being virtually wiped out in local government in recent years, and whether the Liberal Democrats continue their march across southern England. And we'll be watching London, where all the councils are up for re-election, and where they have this referendum declared tonight on whether London should become the first city in the United Kingdom to have its own directly elected mayor. The most striking thing about the voting that's taken place in these councils in England today is how few people have bothered to vote. Just over a quarter, we think, about 26% have actually gone to the polls. So the first question about tonight is how much you can read into it when only 1 in 4 cares to go and mark a cross on a ballot box. What does that mean? We'll obviously be looking at that. And are those people more inclined to be Labour or Tory or Liberal Democrat? In terms of the actual vote, compared with the general election, Labour is down about 5 points, but only a little bit down on its local election results last year. The Conservatives are exactly where they were in the general election, 31%, we think, and the Conservatives are the Liberal Democrats are well up on the general election at about 25%. They were 17 in the general election, but actually that matches with their local election results. Liberal Democrats always do well in local elections, but they'll be pleased by that. So the big question tonight is, does this amount to a thumbs up to Tony Blair? Does it amount to the Tories being on the road to recovery, or does this election suggest that that is still some way off? So that's what we'll be looking at tonight. We've got some results in straight away. Let's just look at these. These will be very exciting to the people in these councils. They're mainly big urban councils in London. The Liberal Democrats, for instance, have gained Liverpool. That was held by Labour for some time. It's been no overall control for a long time. The Labour Party, I think, is divided about 5 ways there. Anyway, the Liberal Democrats have gained control of Liverpool. The Conservatives have gained Tunbridge Wells. Liberal Democrats have done very well there. The Conservatives have regained Tunbridge Wells. You might think that that had always been a Conservative stronghold. And Labour has held on to Trafford, where we'll be going later on. So those are the first results that we've had in. In terms of councils, we've got 25 so far come in. There'll be a lot of no change here. Liberal Democrats are up 1 at 4, the Conservatives up 1 at 2. It's perhaps not the councils that matter so much, though of course it does at local level. It's actually the way people have voted. And we've been not just recording the way people have voted, we've also been talking to people about why they voted the way they did and what they've made of this first year of a Labour government. And with all the evidence to back up our assertions, here's Peter Snow. Peter.
Right, David, quite a difficult election to judge this one. Just before we look at the poll in detail, let me just show you what David mentioned this broadly already. The figures are for our projected national share at this very early stage. It's still quite hard to judge because Labour, yes, they are 5% down at 39% on the general election, but this is a local election. Labour don't tend to score mighty highly in local elections. 39% is actually the worst they've done in local elections for about 5 or 6 years. Nevertheless, it is not a disastrous score for Labour all the same. 31% for the Tories. Yes, this is going to be picking up in various places, but it's the same as that disastrous election share they had a year ago. And in the last 30 years, no opposition party has failed to put on less than 6% in that first year. Tories have put on no percent at all. 25% the Liberal Democrats, they'll be reasonably happy with that. They tend to do rather well in local elections, and 5% the others. Now, the poll. One salient point that came out of the poll was how well Tony Blair is doing in the eyes of people all over the country, and how poorly William Hague is doing. Just look at this picture of the Hague leadership as compared with John Major. We asked people, how do you think William Hague compares with John Major? 14% only said he was more effective than John Major. 34%, a third of all we spoke to, said he was less effective than John Major. And 47%, nearly half, said there was no difference between him and John Major. Don't forget, John Major lost the last election, was a very unpopular Prime Minister. Now, this does suggest that for the Tories, there is a really huge challenge. Now, it was quite interesting that William Hague actually took a roller coaster ride soon after he became leader, and it's the roller coaster ride, in a sense, illustrates the challenge in front of the Tories. There he is in having inherited the Tory party with the worst share of the vote in any general election since the time of the Duke of Wellington. And the fact is that soon after that election, the Tories took a plunge in the polls, not from 30, but down to 20, the low 20s, recovering in the winter, coming up in the spring there, to something like, we reckon now, 31% a year into this Parliament. But that's exactly where they were at the general election, so William Hague has to go an awful lot further if he's to look like winning the next general election. Later on, David, we'll be following that roller coaster ride on to see where William Hague has to get to.
Good, Peter, thanks so much. By the way, when I said only 24% of the people voted, but that survey of opinion, is that those 24%, or is it the country as a whole?
No, we're talking to 4,000 people all over the country, whether they voted or not.
So even if they didn't go and vote, it's not...
Yeah,
yes.
including Scotland and Wales, to get a national picture.
Right, OK, 26%. So I have with me three senior politicians from the three main parties. John Prescott, beside me, Deputy Prime Minister, Secretary of State for the Environment. Sir Norman Foster, Shadow Secretary of State. For that job, Sir Norman Fowler. So turn you into an architect instead of a politician. Mind you, it's a very good career being an architect. I tell you, make a lot of money as Norman Fowler.
Much better paid.
Time to move on. And Ming Campbell from the Liberal Democrats. Well, I better start with you, Sir Norman Foster. In terms of the Tory party, the last time that Labour has always bounced back fast in the year after an election. When we've looked back at these figures, and after the Tory victory in 70 and 71, Labour did very well. After the Tory victory in 79, Labour came back very fast, in London particularly. You haven't bounced back with quite the same verve. Are you worried about that?
Well, Jonathan, I'm not totally sure that's an accurate description of history. I mean, 1983, first year after the 1983 elections, Labour made only 23 gains. After the 1987 election...
Now, I'm talking about change of party, when there's been a change of control from the Tories taking over from Labour.
Well, okay.
The immediate reaction is people return to the party they've just thrown out of office.
Well, look, okay, let's put it another way. What is happening tonight is that so far as we can see, we have we've made over 60 gains in council seats around the country. That comes on the top of 55 by-election gains that we have won since the general election. So we are winning seats steadily. Step by step, we are recovering. And
Have you got a target?
We haven't got a target, but obviously what we want to do is to recover our position in local government. It's not remotely going to be possible to do that tonight. But what I would say, because as you rightly say, we have come to a very low point. But what I would say is that the signs tonight from around the country are of people coming back to the Conservative Party in a whole range of places, from Birmingham, Hartlepool, where we've won 3 seats, the Isle of Wight, where we've won 5 or 6 seats, where Liberals have lost overall control, Tunbridge Wells, where the Liberal Democrats have lost. So I think that introduction by Peter Snow about William Hague and the Conservative Party and all that was obviously written before these results came in. I don't think it's actually proved by what's actually coming.
But hang about. I mean, we're comparing a very, very poor position when these seats were fought in '94. If you can't recover 300 seats tonight, you're nowhere.
I don't. That is nonsensical, frankly,
Why?
David.
Why?
If we don't win seats, but I mean, I'm happy as long as we're winning seats back.
Oh, I see. Just a handful is enough.
Well, we've already won over 60. I don't know what you define as a handful. Labour. I mean, let me just put this. Labour are actually losing seats tonight. Labour have gone down to 39%. Liberal Democrats have lost control. We're actually winning seats. So, you know, I hate to actually interrupt your script on this, but the position is that we are actually winning the seats.
Well, we don't have a script here, but John Prescott, what do you say to what Norman Fowler says?
Well, there's not much to say. I mean, he's got to be saying that sort of thing, hasn't he? But look, I'm concerned about complacency in this, and I think that's coming out. The lowest kind of turnout, that's a matter of concern for democracy, but I think it reflects also complacency. But it's not showing an anti-government vote, quite frankly. If you look at the vote, something like 39% now, compare it to a comparable period in 1994 as you were, we're basically the same, about the 40% share. Now that's quite remarkable after 12 months in government, if we want all the comparative analysis of usually there's a swing away from government when it starts in the first 12 months. So that seems very well.
You're well down on the polls, of course, because the polls are showing you 50, over 50.
Well, yes, I mean, I looked at those figures before we came on. The polls always show us a lot higher, I think. Well, they show us a lot higher and we're less. With the Liberals, it's the opposite way about. Polls tend to show them less than they actually get. But leaving that aside, if you look at the two councils you're talking about, a few votes can change these things. Liverpool was not overall controlled by Labour, and it's now gone to Liberals, I understand. I think that's the same with Tunbridge Wells, wasn't it? Where it wasn't actually held, it wasn't the overall control.
It was minority control.
Yes, it wasn't overall control, but one or two can make the change.
And of course, we have a problem tonight, because only a third of these seats are up in most places.
But what's quite important, yes, but quite as important, Trafford. I mean, we've never held that before. 1996, if you can hold Trafford against this kind of situation, that's got to be a signal that the government appears to still be popular in this, and I think all the polls tend to show it. And these results are going to show it, but we're going to see through the night some different results in different areas, which are going to be very interesting to interpret.
Campbell.
Well, we'd all be very sensible to take a health warning about trying to read too much into a poll of 26%. Because that, I think, as you said in your introduction, is probably the lowest recorded vote ever in local government elections. But for us, the prize of Liverpool is obviously very significant. To get 25% of the vote against the last national opinion poll of 14%, I think Peter Snow said we'd be reasonably pleased. Well, actually, I'm unreasonably pleased about that. And as for the Conservatives, they did so disastrously in 1994, and indeed in 1990, that it would be very surprising indeed if they weren't winning back some seats in places that people regard as true blue heartlands of the Conservative Party.
You've held on to Congleton.
And Brentwood too, I believe, as well.
Okay, fine. Well, thank you very much. We'll come back in just a moment. But let's now go around the country, as we will be all evening, to some of these key places where it's possible that the Tories may make gains, Liberal Democrats may be in difficulty, whatever. We'll go around, first of all, I think we're starting at Liverpool, but Jill Dando is going to be guiding us round a few of the key areas in England only, not Scotland, not Wales, just in England that we're watching tonight. Jill.
Liverpool's personality reflects its past growth from a sailing village to a prosperous port. Now, although the large ships have gone, the legacy of the city's role as a gateway to the world lives on in its rich and vibrant culture. It has the longest established Chinese community in Britain, and of course its reputation for setting the worldwide musical trends in the 1960s is legendary. The council is the largest employer, but in some parts of the city unemployment stands at 20%. Let's hear tonight's latest news from Liverpool.
Well, the latest news here from Liverpool is very dramatic indeed, because Mr. Blair maybe is still in a honeymoon nationally, but locally his party is in a nightmare. The Liberal Democrats have swept to power here in Liverpool with a gain of 10 wards, and that makes them overall control for the very first time in their history in political activity in Liverpool. It is also the first time that the Liberal Democrats have controlled any metropolitan district council. And the question for the Labour Party now is, will there be an inquiry into the way in which the Labour Party conducts its affairs in Liverpool? But that's for tomorrow, perhaps. For now, I have the new leader of Liverpool City Council, Councillor Mike Storey. Councillor Storey, in your wildest dreams, you couldn't have expected this result tonight.
This is a historic moment for resurgent Liverpool. It's a great night for people who share our vision of taking Liverpool to the top of the Premier League of European cities. A night for people who share our vision of providing good local services, providing money for economic regeneration spent wisely and not squandered. But that's Liberal Democrats, but we want to share that for Liverpool. We don't want to see, we haven't got monopoly of ideas. we speak for everybody in this community who wants to come forward and work with us, whether it be in trade unions, in business, in the arts, in other political parties. If they want to work with us to take Liverpool to the top, then we'll listen and we'll certainly work with them.
But can you call it a mandate when the average turnout is about 20%?
Well, there is a problem of low turnout. It's not just in Liverpool, throughout the country, and I think one of the reasons for that is the daft way we vote. It makes it difficult to vote. You have to search and find a polling station, all the other problems. And of course, local government has had many of its services, many of its functions taken off it by the previous Tories. If we're going to make local government work, if we're going to provide, you know, the proper responsibility for local government, then people will have a real desire to go and vote.
People always say that the Liberal Democrats promise everything in different wards. Now you've got to run this city. Can you actually do it?
Well, I think tonight we're going to give ourselves a pat on the back. I think there might be a small party. Tomorrow, the jacket comes off and we will start work immediately. It's not going to be an easy task. We've had 15 years of Labour in this city. Council tax is the highest, gone up, what, 62% in 4 years. It's going to be a hard task, but we're prepared to give it our best.
Councillor Storey, thank you very much indeed.
Birmingham has a strong tradition of civic pride. Its council serves 1 million people and has an annual turnover of £2 billion, making it Britain's second largest local authority. The pneumatic tyre was invented here, and one of Britain's most successful cars, the Mini, has been made here for nearly 40 years. The city is hosting the Eurovision Song Contest, of course, this weekend, and later in the month it'll be welcoming Bill Clinton and other world leaders to the G8 summit. Let's catch up with tonight's news in Birmingham.
Well, here in Birmingham, perhaps no surprise, Labour have held Birmingham. It is a bastion for the Labour Party, so no great upset there. But what has happened is very important for the Conservative Party. This was a real point for them to try and get ahead, because the Liberal Democrats had become the majority party in Birmingham, and the target for the Conservatives was to overtake them, and they've just done it. They've now got 17 seats to the Liberal Democrats 16. They've just squeaked ahead. They're now the majority party again in Birmingham. And with me I have Vivian Barton, who is one of the new victorious Conservative councillors here. Why do you think you won your ward of Berkeley Green with 1,000 majority, which was a quite sizable amount?
Yes, 1,162. And I believe that is because the people of Berkeley Green have said no to socialism.
But it's only 3 seats that you've actually got here now. It's no great change, is it?
I believe it is, because traditionally Berkeley Green, my ward, is a Labour ward, and they have been sick to the back teeth of being controlled by a Labour council, and as far as they are concerned in Berkeley Green, they don't want a Labour council, they want a Conservative council, and so therefore they voted for a Conservative councillor.
Vivian Barton, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In the Yorkshire and Humberside regions, the traditional industries were mining, steel, wool and deep-sea fishing, and they went hand in hand with support for Labour. Sheffield now produces more steel than ever before, but with fewer people. Unemployment is almost 11%, and that problem was exposed in more ways than one in the film The Full Monty, about a group of jobless men in Sheffield who became male strippers. It's Britain's 4th largest city with over 500,000 people, and yet 1/3 of it lies in the Peak District National Park. The student population is 30,000, and next year the city will launch the National Centre for Pop Music. Let's hear what's happening in Sheffield.
Well, here in Sheffield, in the town hall, it's been a dramatic evening. The Liberal Democrats have won 5 seats. That's more than they expected. They've won them from Labour, old Labour. Sheffield's been Labour for as long as anyone can remember. Clear dissatisfaction here in the city with Labour, perhaps because of high levels of debt and because of the high council tax. The Lib Dems haven't won overall control. They're still some way from that, but they are now poised to do very well, perhaps in the elections next year or the year after. Well, with me is Martin Lawson, who is a Labour councillor. He wasn't fighting his seat tonight, but Martin, it was a very bad result for Labour. It's been a bad night for Labour. Why did you do so badly?
I think basically because the Liberal Democrats have been very good at knocking. If you're not in power, you can give ideas that you know aren't going to go into fruition, so therefore you can promise things without the funding behind them. And also we have not been that good at putting over our message, I think, at times, and have left things too late rather than telling people through the year what we're doing.
Do you think, though, that with this old Labour city, this is perhaps the end of the Blair honeymoon up here in the north?
Well, you call it Old Labour City, but most of the Labour councillors are fairly new. They've not been on that long.
What about the Blair honeymoon, though? Isn't it over?
Well, I think the Blair honeymoon is a thing that really hasn't affected this city in that way.
OK, Martin Lawson, thank you very much.
We heard the Liberal Democrats taking control of Liverpool, but they've had some losses which will disappoint them to set against that. The Isle of Wight in particular, where they had a majority of 14, the Isle of Wight is slightly special. Only London and the Isle of Wight have all the seats in the council being voted on. All the other places, which they've lost control of, West Lindsey, Rochford and Woking, for instance, only a third of the seats were able to change hands, so only a third of them were up for election tonight. But the Isle of Wight, Liberal Democrats have lost control of. Now, during this programme, we're going to be bringing you the results from your own region. We saw Jill Dando a moment ago going around some places, but we'll be doing it in much greater detail a couple of times during the night. For London and the South East, we'll be keeping a particular eye on the few Tory strongholds in London, like Wandsworth, where Labour hopes to make inroads. We'll check the Liberal Democrats' progress to see if they make any progress in places like Southwark against Labour. And we'll be looking at the troubled councils like Hackney, how Labour does, where it's been under criticism for its conduct. And, of course, the mayoral referendum. So, let's look at London now in particular. Apart from the Isle of Wight, which I mentioned a moment ago, its 32 councils are the only ones where all the seats are up for re-election. So it's quite a good guide to the feeling of the country as a whole about politics. A clean sweep is possible in London, and traditionally it's been a place where you can actually see how the country as a whole is thinking. Peter. No, Peter. Oh, right. Let's join Jill Dando for a look at this London area. 32 boroughs.
Thank you, David. More people will be affected by the outcome of the referendum on the London Mayor and elected Assembly than by either the Scottish or the Welsh referendums of last year. London is Europe's biggest city, with about 7 million people. A quarter of Londoners are under the age of 20, and a fifth are from ethnic groups. London accounts for nearly a quarter of all businesses in the country, and average earnings are nearly a third higher than in the rest of Britain. About 1 million people travel into the centre every morning, and at the last count, London had well over 20 million visitors a year. So let's find out the latest news on today's referendum.
Thanks very much indeed, Jill. Well, we're here in Church House, a stone's throw from the House of Commons, and the politicians have already started to arrive. We've only had one result so far, and that is for the City of London, which has voted by 2 to 1 in favour of there being a mayor and directly elected assembly. But let me just add a little health warning on that particular result, because the voters only add up to 5,000 in the City of London, and only 30% bothered to vote. So only about 2,000 people turned out to vote for this. And the turnout figures that we're getting across the capital are very low. Let me just give you a couple of examples. 30.1% in Lewisham, 35% in Bexley, 39% in Wandsworth. Now, if you compare that to the turnout figures that there were in 1994 and 1990, these are well down. And part of the problem, I think, that there has been here in London is that although there's been a rather effective yes campaign, there's been no argument. There has been no campaign. It's almost gone by default that people want a mayor, and we're seeing a very low turnout indeed. And I think that will be a worry to the politicians. And I spoke to one of the aspirant mayors here a few moments ago, and he said, frankly, people are sick of politics, they're sick of politicians, they're fed up to the back teeth with all of us. David.
Thanks so much, John. Well, let's have a look at London, can we, Peter, in more detail?
Sorry, lost me earlier. I was just preparing this fascinating little item on the poll we've done about the mayors in London. It's quite complicated, but it's really quite an exciting finish, you'll find. We talked to 1,200 people in London. We asked them in 2 goes. First of all, we gave them the choice of the Tory and Labour Party candidates for mayor. We said, OK, we'll give you Trevor Phillips, Ken Livingstone and Glenda Jackson for Labour, and we'll give you Stephen Norris, Chris Patten and Geoffrey Archer for the Conservatives. Which one do you prefer as the nominee for those 2 parties? And here's what happens. Here they are on their jet skis. Watch them speed along the Thames as they decide who the winner is. 41% Ken Livingstone, Glenda Jackson 22%, 13% Trevor Phillips. On this side, Chris Patten 35%, 21% for Geoffrey Archer, only 7% for Stephen Norris. So off they go then, the two nominees, and these are 1,200 people in London telling us who they think should represent the parties, coming up to confront Simon Hughes, the likely Liberal Democrat challenger for mayor. Now, in this race, Simon Hughes versus Ken Livingstone and Chris Patten, look what happens. Here they go. Simon Hughes going back on the jet skis. Ken Livingstone coming forward 39%, leading 12% ahead of Chris Patten and leaving the Liberal Democrats way behind. So it does look in that sort of fight as if Ken Livingstone has a very long head ahead of the others. But now we bring on a mystery candidate. Guess who? None other than Richard Branson. Here he is. Now, he said he won't stand as mayor. We put him on a jet ski here just in case he changed his mind. He may do after this. And this is what happens when you ask people, put Richard Branson in there with the three political candidates and see what happens. Here we go. This is what happened. We talked to people today in London, and we find an absolutely almost a whisker lead there for Ken Livingstone at 30%, over Richard Branson on 29%, leaving Chris Patten way behind on 19%, and down there Simon Hughes on just 4%. So Ken Livingstone takes it both times, and Richard Branson, a very exciting challenger, David.
Thanks very much, Peter. Well, down at Church House, where the results of the mayoral referendum are going to be announced, to speak to some of the people who might be candidates and talk about the issues that having a mayor of London will lead to people discussing, and talk about the kinds of things people would like to do, we join Janet Street-Porter. Janet.
Hi, well that's the result from Lewisham, and I'm here with Geoffrey Archer and Glenda Jackson. Geoffrey, there seems to be a very low turnout altogether. Does it mean that people haven't really bought the idea of having a mayor for London?
No, I don't think so. I think a year ago they had what they thought was the real election, and they're probably a bit sick of politicians and elections at the moment. This is pretty well in line with local turnouts in local elections. I don't think there's
But
a
it
great deal
seems,
of
I mean, you've said time and time again this is a really important issue, and yet we're seeing turnouts as low as 30%. If it's so fundamentally important to people in London to have a mayor, why haven't they gone down to polling stations and voted?
I think what is good about those who have voted, 75% so far, have made it very clear they want a mayor against 22% who don't. So what you're getting is a really clear indication that that is what Londoners want, and I suspect that's true right across the board.
Glenda, do you think this is a poor show, that people haven't really bought the idea of having a mayor?
Absolutely not, and I don't think the low turnout can be attributed to apathy. I think it's certainty on the part of Londoners. When I've been out canvassing, I haven't met anyone who didn't think that a directly elected mayor and assembly was a great idea. In fact, I mean, people said to me, who in their right minds would vote against it? Now, if there had been a strong no campaign, if there had been any group that did not think it was a good idea, then I think you may have seen a different sort of turnout. But London is so certain that this is a good idea, that this is what they want. And we're seeing by the returns, I mean, the most recent one, 78% saying yes.
Now, the people who have bothered to vote have said they want a mayor. Geoffrey, are you confident still of getting the Tory nomination? You're putting an awful lot of time and effort into it.
At the moment I'm doing what I call listening and learning. I've spent the last year going around London. I've seen everyone from the Commissioner of Police to the Director of Traffic, to Streetwise, to Centrepoint, from London First, to London Pride. I've used it as a year to learn and find out about London. I think that's the important thing. And more recently, spent my time on the Yes campaign, working for the Yes campaign to get people to vote yes.
In our poll that we showed earlier, 35% of all voters wanted Chris Patten as the Tory nominee, and in fact, even Tory voters were voting for Chris Patten. Does this discourage you at all?
No, I think Chris should, if that's the case, Chris should come onto the field. He'd make an excellent mayor.
Could you be tempted to run, Glenda? I mean, you feel very strongly that there should be a mayor, and you're encouraged by the fact that so many people are voting yes. Could you be tempted to run?
Well, I was taught always to give in to temptation.
So you could be tempted to run?
That is what I'm saying. I mean, we're not at the stage yet where there are any serious candidates, I think, at the moment, where the process of going through
But Glenda,
a
there aren't
selection...
any women.
Well, I'm a woman. There are half the population of London are women. I cannot believe that, you know, it isn't possible to have more than one woman candidate up there when we are actually at the stage when the candidates have been selected.
Geoffrey, do you think that the Mayor of London will have real powers?
One of the disadvantages the new mayor will have is that he doesn't have a large enough budget, or she doesn't have a large enough budget, They may not be able to handle the problems, such as the fact that the infrastructure of the tubes requires immediately 1.2 billion, and over the next 15 years, 7 billion, in order to take it into the 21st century. It'll be vitally important that there's possible to have a relationship between the mayor and the government, because either the government will have to pay that money, or we will have to ask other people to come in and invest in the tube system. It'll have to be one or the other. There's no other way of getting money. So the mayor himself will not, or herself, will not have that sort of power, because with 3.5 billion as the overall budget at the moment, they simply won't have the money.
Thank you both very much. Now it's back to David.
Thanks, Janet. Well, that result that Janet mentioned at the beginning from Lewisham was a 63% yes vote, which is not the 75% people have been talking about. We don't know how Greater London will come out altogether. I'm joined by Ken Livingstone, the MP for Brent North, and the man who Peter Snow showed on the jet skis. I don't know whether you saw it, Mr. Livingstone. I don't know whether you can jet ski, but anyway, there you were, in the lead, as people's choice for Mayor of London.
Well, I was delighted with the poll because that's the first poll that shows my position being stronger than Richard Branson. So far, all the polls have shown Richard Branson well ahead of me. And I think a lot of this is simply the fact that all these press stories saying, well, Livingstone won't be allowed to stand, has kept my name in the limelight. It's quite amazingly bad tactics on the part of those people who are trying to keep me out.
Do you think Labour will allow you to stand?
Well, almost all this briefing has been by very junior officials in the Labour Party machine, people who never meet Tony Blair. Certainly they're not privy to his thinking. At the end of the day, Tony Blair will have to decide.
Okay.
And
John Prescott said something to you, and I couldn't
It's not Tony Blair that decides it, it's the party that decides it, and I think you'll agree that.
Yes, but the reality is, as John knows, that when we're at an NEC meeting, the leader doesn't lose votes. I think at the end of the day, Tony Blair will allow the London Labour Party members to decide, and I think any other policy would make us look ridiculous.
Yeah, but hang on, we're talking gobbledygook, people who don't follow Labour Party affairs closely. The question is, isn't it, whether the whole Labour Party in London will have a completely free choice of any Labour Party member who puts his name forward, including you, or whether the NEC of the Labour Party makes a shortlist on which you are either on or maybe not on, in which case they can't vote for you. That's the point.
If you look at Tony Blair's career, his entire career is about giving party members choice, and it would involve him doing a complete U-turn. I don't think that will happen. I think Tony Blair will fairly shortly make it clear the London Labour Party members will be allowed to choose who they wish to stand, and there'll be no interference, and then all these ghastly little spin doctors will just have to shut up.
John Prescott, will London Labour members have a completely free choice? Will they be allowed to vote for Ken Livingstone?
Well, we've now seen that, thank goodness, it looks as if they've actually voted for an elected mayor. That's welcome. It's exactly what we wanted. And now the party at the executive, Ken and I, will sit down at the executive and determine the rules for election. That's what he wants to do. That's what he was elected to do. That's what I was elected to do. And we'll get on with the job.
Why do you need any rules? Because like them in the Tory...
Of course you have rules called democracy. You decide the rules in a party of how we select our candidates, how the Labour Party runner will be presented, when the election will take place. All these are a matter, on the one half, for the National Executive and the Labour Party, and the other one for government dates of...
So you could say some Labour Party members can't stand for mayor. Is that right? Is that democratic?
You're not going to be getting out of me what we've got to decide in an election in the decisions in the National
No, but this
Executive.
is an issue. This is an issue.
Well, you may well be an issue. We have a National Executive make decisions about these matters. Now the result clearly has come through tonight. We will meet in May and make our decisions, a report then, and then we'll start to make the decisions about selection. It's exactly the same that happened in Scotland and Wales. Once they'd had the referendum, we sat down and made the decisions of how we will complete the selection of our candidate and when the election will take place.
Ken Livingstone, are you happy to abide by that it should be the NEC that decides whether, who can put their names forward for this
the NEC's
election to
really got
decide?
to have some rules. I mean, I think a rule where, say, 10 constituencies nominate someone and that would be accepted would be fine. Clearly, somebody who just gets nominated by one little ward has got to prove a bit more support London-wide.
But are you confident you'll be there?
I can't believe Tony Blair is going to make us look less democratic than the Tories, and I hope we get over this soon, because I think that what people want to hear is what I'm going to do about the buses, what I'm going to do to improve public transport. And on this, there is no disagreement between John Prescott, Ken Livingstone or Tony Blair. We want to see a decent transport system for London.
OK, and one last thing, Ken Livingstone. This is something that you've argued for, Labour Party's argued for, all the parties have argued for. and yet so few people bothered actually to say that they were in favour of it. It's not much of a boost for the idea of a mayor, is it?
Well, I think the problem is because no major party was opposed to it, you couldn't get people worried that it might be lost. I mean, I think if the Tories had opposed this, then we would have been in a position to be a much higher turnout.
I see. OK, thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Livingstone.
Thank you.
Now, Peter Snow, you have news of that referendum and the prediction of the result, or the real result?
Yes, indeed, no, a prediction result. The real result, we had to wait for another 30 counts. But 32 boroughs in London, and that little area in the middle there, the City of London itself, so 33 counting areas, 2 results in. Lewisham, green yes to a mayor and an assembly. The City of London, green for yes as well. Now, how do we add it all up? Well, what I want you to do is to imagine the River Thames as a racecourse, with Westminster Bridge as the starting line down here, and Tower Bridge as the ideal target for either side. Half of London's 5 million electorate. So 2,500 of the 5 million voting for either side, and the winner will reach Tower Bridge. And these bridges in between here represent 500,000 votes for each side on its way to that ideal target, half of London's electorate. And we'll see just how far short with this kind of turnout it's turning out to be. Right, Westminster Bridge, the starting line. Under there, bobbing around on the left-hand side, the green racing boat, green for yes. Over here, the red racing boat, red for no. Under starters' orders, off they go. Let's see what happens. Here they are, just chalking up the 2 results in so far in Lewisham and the City. 11,000 odd for no, 41,000 for yes. Now, of course, whichever boat ends up ahead will win, because you only need a simple majority. But the nearer to Tower Bridge the winning boat ends up, the more convincing that victory will be. And look how far the boats are away at the moment. Of course, another 30 old boroughs to count yet. So here's Tower Bridge. Let's count up the votes on either side. Yes, so far, with just 2 in, 41,165. The turnout, well below a third of the electorate, 30%, 11,634 for no. That is a 78% to 22% yes, on the turnout again of 30%. And we're now forecasting that the yeses will get it, because we reckon that people are voting fairly typically in both these boroughs, and that's the way it's going to go. Something like a 3-to-1 yes is going to be the outcome at the end of it all. But this is an early forecast. It's going to be yes to a mayor and an assembly for London, David.
Thanks so much, Peter. The Tories have taken Runnymede, which they were looking forward to recovering, and the Liberal Democrats have lost control of Colchester. Alex Dunlop is there. What's the story, Alex?
Well, as you can see, it's pretty well all over by the shouting, David. Yes, Colchester was a Liberal Democrat stronghold. Their only one in East Anglia. I say was because a few minutes ago they lost it. Before tonight, they had a majority of 4. Labour and the Tories were hoping to squeeze them out, and they've succeeded. The Lib Dems have lost 5 seats, 2 to Labour and 3 to the Conservatives. There is some small consolation for the Liberal Democrats. One of their candidates, Bob Russell, has got back in with a reduced majority. He happens to be the town's Liberal Democrat MP. I'm afraid apathy won the day. The turnout, I've just been told, is 32%, and that's well down on the same time these seats were contested.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. Well, sitting here with me through the night to talk about the results, Professor Anthony King of Essex University and Robin Oakley, the BBC's political editor. Tony King, first of all, what do you make of what we've had in so far?
One of the things we have to remember is that these really are local elections. The variation from part of the country to part of the country, from kind of council to kind of council, is quite remarkable. I mean, here you have the Liberal Democrats actually gaining Liverpool, one of the largest local authorities in the country, from the Labour Party, or at least a Labour-dominated council, and then down in the south of England losing the Isle of Wight. These really are local elections. But one of the things we're going to be keeping an eye on is, are the Conservatives recovering? And I'm bound to say the signs of that are very small. They are picking up seats. The last general election last May, they got 31% of the vote. Our current projection still has them on 31% of the vote. They're not in the ditch, but I think the idea that they're on the road to recovery
Norman Fowler
is premature.
seems to think they're soaring high.
I heard him say that.
Okay. Robin Oakley.
Well, I think the Tories are going to be relieved that they are, in a sense, bottoming out. They've gone through so many rounds of elections over so many years now, setting new lows on every occasion. At least on this time, they seem to be making some small progress, but it's not going to be anything like the progress that they need to put themselves back in the position they were when these same seats were fought 4 years ago. They'd need to make something like 440 gains to do that. They're not on target to make that kind of recovery.
What do you think Labour is going to make of what's happening on the basis of what we've had in so far?
I think Labour will think that they got their tactics right when the National Executive sent out a memo a little while ago saying rubbish the Liberal Democrats as the party of cheap sloganising and amateur economics, because the signs are that where Labour are suffering, it's in the northern municipalities where the Liberal Democrats are their main rivals. They have been able to hit at old Labour, I think, in the northern municipalities, perhaps a little bit of effect there from some of the sleaze allegations against some long-standing Labour councils.
And the Liberal Democrats have lost control of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 councils so far, I think it is, but their popular vote is rather strong.
Popular vote's doing all right, but I think where...
Is that the Tony King factor? These are all quirky.
They're quirky, but I think the Liberal Democrats must be worried that there are some signs here that they're cozying up to Labour in the policy of constructive opposition, supporting some things that the Labour government is doing nationally, is hitting their effect.
Well, you'd be surprised, because our poll, I think, we'll hear from later on, I think shows that on the whole, Liberal Democrats rather like that. I mean, they approve of the cosy relationship. They belong to the Ashdown should be in the cabinet. We'll talk about that later on. But we have to let's have a closer look, region by region, at your own results. Right, so let's have a look at some of the results in London and the South East. These are the Liberal Democrat losses. Woking, Rochford and Hastings, I think Labour have taken control of Hastings, direct from the Liberal Democrats. And the Liberal Democrats have held on to Brentwood, St Albans and Ada. Conservative gains in Tunbridge Wells and in Runnymede, they were both fairly close, and Labour gain there in Hastings. No overall control in South Bedfordshire, Bedford, West Oxfordshire, Cherwell and Epping Forest. And on the London referendum, our current prediction is that 78% of the 30% or so who voted say yes, and 22% say no. And Ken Livingstone, speaking on this programme a moment ago, said, well, I've lost it. He said something. Anyway, we lost it. But he said he said he hoped that the Labour Party would allow him to be a candidate, is effectively what he said. Anyway, we'll have more details about London and the South East now from Peter Snow. Peter.
Well, you remember, David, we had Ken Livingstone out there on his jet skis, just a whisker ahead of Richard Branson, and he is the man that London's voters just think should be mayor. There he is, Ken Livingstone, with a mayoral chain round his neck. But what about the powers of the mayor? What about the effect of London having a mayor? We asked people, do you think that a mayor for London would mean someone to speak up for the city, easy to get things done, better trains and buses, wouldn't make much difference, or too much power for one person? Rather negative thoughts down here, rather positive thoughts at the top here. And this is what people said in London when we asked them. 3/4 of all the people we asked said that a mayor would mean there'd be someone to speak up for the city. 67% said it'd be easier to get things done. Something like 2/3 of people said, well, it would mean that we'd get things done in London a bit better. Only half, or maybe if you like as many as half, thought that a mayor in London would mean that there'd be better trains and buses. 41%, however, thought there'd be not much difference. And 35%, just over a third of all people, thought that there would be too much power in an election for a mayor given to one person as a result of that. So there you are. Positive thoughts at the top here, but worries about the power the mayor would have in a minority of the electorate, and a whole 41% saying it wouldn't make any difference. David.
Thanks very much, Peter. Well, now let's go and have a look at some of the key places around in the London area. We go first of all to Max Cotton, who's in Brent. Max.
Thanks very much indeed, David. This is the sort of poor London borough that Labour ought to be able to control with their eyes shut. And they don't, because they've had a loony left image for a very, very long time here, and they also don't control the key north of the borough. Now, Labour are saying tonight that's all going to change. I just heard a cheer from behind me. Labour are predicting they're going to take one of the key marginal wards in Brent that they need to control. They're saying they have no difficulty at all in taking control of Brent Council tonight. And that's a story from here.
Well, here in Bromley, we haven't got any results in because of the time it's taken to separate the ballot papers for the referendum from those of the local elections. Bromley has been true blue Tory since its inception back in 1965, and since then the Tory lead has gradually been whittled down until it now stands at just 4 seats, and this is a big target for the Liberal Democrats. There needs to be a 2% swing against the Tories for the council to go into no overall control, a slightly larger 10% swing for the Liberal Democrats to take control. Now, the Liberal Democrats have put a huge amount of effort in trying to win the key 4 wards that they need here to win control of the council. They are, I would say, optimistic or hopeful that they can at least get it to no overall control. Slightly harder to get overall control. The Tories, though, you speak to them, they say that they're optimistic too that they can hold on. That's the story so far here in Bromley.
And I'm in Church House, where we're still desperately awaiting more results in the London referendum. We're getting a couple more turnouts, and it's low. Although Camden has come in with the remarkably neat figure of a turnout of 33.3%. I don't know whether that's recurring or not. But anyway, I'm joined now by Simon Jenkins, Times columnist and one of the prominent voices in the Yes campaign. The turnout figures are extremely disappointing, aren't they?
I wouldn't say extremely. They're predictably disappointing. We've had a year of politics-free London. London local government is in a mess. One of the reasons why we need a mayor is we haven't got good turnouts like this. And I think the most important thing now is to go from the strength you've got from a victory, and it's clearly going to be a victory, to make absolutely sure that when we have a mayoral election, a proper election, we get a much higher turnout.
But doesn't it show that there is just extreme apathy, and that actually the people like yourselves haven't sold the idea to the general public that a mayor is a good thing?
It looks like a 70–80% vote in favour of a mayor. The question is
of those who voted?
Of those who voted. You cannot assume that those who didn't vote don't want it. Every opinion poll says much the same. This was not a necessary referendum. Most people thought they voted for this when they voted Labour at the last election. So it really isn't a significant factor, the size of the turnout.
Have you been hamstrung at all by the fact that there really hasn't been a no campaign worthy of its name?
Well, there's no doubt at all. If you have a controversial vote, more people come out to the polls. Most people thought this was going to be a victory for the Yes campaign. Most people thought it was unnecessary, I think. Most people can't wait to have an election for a proper mayor. This was pretty unnecessary. So I just don't think it's a very significant turnout.
And when it actually comes to the election for the mayor, him or herself, will it be any different?
Everything we know about direct election, personality mayors, they have high turnouts. It makes all the difference to have a single person, a highly politicised, personalised campaign. People become interested in the personalities, they care who wins, they're charged up, it's exciting, it's razzmatazz. It's quite different from a referendum.
Simon Jenkins, thank you very much indeed. David, back to you in the studio.
Thanks, John. Well, any comment on what's been going on in London and the South East, Tony King?
Just one thing I think we should bear in mind. There clearly is now going to be a mayor for London. That person is, as Simon Jenkins was emphasising, going to be directly elected. That person may not have enormous power, may not have an enormous budget, only £3.5 billion, but is going, in fact, to have the largest constituency, the biggest mandate of any elected official in this country. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact
And what's
that
the significance of that?
That, I think, is going to have a real effect on the balance of power in this country. We are seeing a real dispersion of power to Scotland, Wales, to the courts, to European institutions. We're now going to see that in London. I cannot believe that in 10 or 20 years' time, the Mayor of London is not going to be a big player on the national scene.
But is that going to be a good thing, or is he going to play politics against central government, ask for money to come back to London? We'll end up with the whole of the United Kingdom fighting itself. If every town has a mayor, every council has a mayor, in the big metropolitan councils, they all have mayors. It's going to be like Scotland, Wales and England all over again and times 10.
Well, I think you're absolutely right to assume, first, that there are going to be more elected mayors. This is going to spread like a contagion. And secondly, that those elected mayors, but even more the First Minister in Scotland and the principal people in Wales, are definitely going to spend a great deal of their time fighting London. Indeed, there's already evidence from the polls in Scotland that that's the way you will make headway in local
and equally, one of the candidates for mayors here, Trevor Phillips, has said he wants £3 million back for London from Scotland. So, I mean, we'll end up all... Well, anyway, we'll see how it goes. We must stop there because we're coming to the end of this section, and we'll go back and have a look at the results nationally. And this is how things stand at 8 minutes, just a bit after midnight. With the council results, first of all, let's look at those. Labour on 62 tonight, and no change so far. The Liberal Democrats, they're on 12, they're down 5. The Conservatives on 5, they're up 2, and there are 3 more, no overall control. Liberal Democrats gain control of Liverpool. Liberal Democrat losses the Isle of Wight, West Lindsey, Rochford, Woking, Colchester and Hastings. Conservative gains Tunbridge Wells and Runnymede. Labour losses Cambridge. And Labour holds in Trafford, Bristol, Crawley, Rochdale, Tamworth and Waveney. And this is how the London referendum is running in actual results at the moment. 78% yes, 22% no. Peter.
And David, 2 contrasting pictures in national terms. This is why the Tories are making the gains, because they're 5% up on what for them was an atrocious election in 1994, local election 94. Labour Party are down on what was a very good election for them, and the Liberal Democrats are down. So, Liberal Democrats losing a few, Tories winning a few, Labour losing a few. But that allows us to project the national share of the vote. This is the pattern now of what we estimate the support for the parties nationally is as a result of those changes on 94. And here we see Labour on 38%, 6% down on the general election, 32% the Conservatives, just 1% up on where they were in the general election, but still doing pretty poorly for an opposition 1 year in, and the Liberal Democrats on 24%, doing rather less well in local elections than in recent times, but compared to the general election, of course, substantially up. David.
Peter, thanks very much. Let's go down to Tory party headquarters where Hugh Edwards is. Hugh, what reaction have you had from the Tories to the results that have come in so far? Do they agree with Peter Snow, who says it's rather disappointing for them?
Well, David, what I'd say is this, that so far I've been trying to gauge what the Tories are realistically expecting, no matter about the grandstanding and the spinning, what the realistic expectations are. Started off during the course of the evening with around 250 gains, told a little while ago that it might be less than that, so clearly in terms of advancing it's modest if it is an advance. And with me, one of Mr Haig's closest lieutenants, the MP Alan Duncan. Mr Duncan, if an advance at all this evening, it seems to be a very, very modest one indeed.
That's very bad grandstanding and spinning from you, because we have never said 250 gains.
Not publicly.
But what I never, even privately.
Well, that's for me to say, but still, yes.
Well, I know, but you won't say it because you're being spun. But, I mean, what we're seeing tonight, and it's very early days, is a modest advance. We're seeing, I think, that the Labour Party is going back a bit. We're seeing that the Liberals have come off the top. And we're seeing that we are making a slow, a gradual but steady advance. And I think that is a realistic prediction for the rest of the evening. We'll see what's going to happen. But I think that it confounds a lot of the critics. But it is a steady advance, and I think that it shows that the leadership of William Hague has laid foundations which are going to be credible for the future.
We're looking roughly, very roughly, at this stage, at around 31% of a national share of the vote for the Conservatives this evening, roughly what you got on May the 1st last year. So how do you square that with an advance of any kind?
Well, I think that if you were to look at the figures for the general election, we'd have been stuffed in a lot of these councils, and tonight it looks as though we're going to do rather better. Of course, the statistics will compare what we do today with what happened 4 years ago, but I think what we're seeing is a steady advance, and I think this is probably better than many people expected, and I look forward to seeing what happens in the rest of tonight's results, in the hope that we actually make modest improvements in what we did last time.
I want to touch finally, Mr Duncan, on some of the findings in the national opinion poll that Peter Snow talked about earlier on, about the leader himself, Mr Hague himself, and the findings there seem to suggest that he's having some difficulty establishing himself as leader, and indeed that lots of people might prefer and still prefer Mr Major as a potential leader for the Tory party. Is that a problem? Is this a problem in terms of establishing Mr Hague's authority?
If you, with your usual professional integrity, give William Hague the publicity he deserves, then people will see the merit of his leadership.
Mr Duncan, thank you very much indeed. And David, it's back to you in the studio.
Hugh, just before you go, why are you outside in the cold and not in the nice, warm, cosy heartland of the Tory party?
I think the Conservatives take the view, David, that this evening is an evening of private number crunching for them in there, and Labour and the Lib Dems this evening are happy to let us in, but the Conservatives are happy to let us out in the balmy evening. Thankfully, it's not a very cold evening, or otherwise my readout of this situation would be much less pleasant than it is.
OK, thanks so much. We're back with you later on. We go down to Michael Crick now, who is looking at the voters rather than the politicians of London. And where are you, Michael? At Waterloo? Victoria?
I'm at Waterloo.
Waterloo.
Waterloo Station, here I am. And it's about an hour, I think, until the final train here at about 1:10 And I've managed to persuade a selection of late-night stragglers to stick around and have a word with us. Now, Carolyn, you are probably in a majority today in that you didn't actually vote at all. Why was that on a historic day for London?
I didn't actually get the chance during the course of today.
How would you have voted if you had the chance?
Probably a no.
Why is that?
To be honest. I probably haven't watched enough of the coverage on the television or anything, but I don't actually see a need for a Mayor of London.
Now, Ree, you voted yes, I think. Why was that?
Because I think London needs the voice. We need to get things done. Apathy is the worst disease. So let's get on and do things, and I just think it's the best way.
What kind of things?
Everything. Look at the transport. The city's a mess. It has been for years, so it can't get any worse. I'm sure the Mayor can do something, pull it all together, you know.
Now, David, you voted yes as well, but I think with some reservations.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is lots of opportunities for someone to do something useful, but the problem is, someone like Ken Livingstone, who's probably the #1 candidate now, he was actually in office 10 years ago, and he had quite a few problems then, so my only worry is that if someone actually does get elected, what's he going to do, and is he going to have the tools to actually do anything when he gets into power? Or she.
Of course, Tony Blair may do his best to ensure that Ken Livingstone doesn't get anywhere near elected.
Well, the only person in Britain who can actually do anything at the moment is Tony Blair, and he's already got a job that he doesn't want to leave, so that's the big problem, I think.
Now, George, you voted no today.
I did, yes.
What made you vote no?
I think because I haven't really seen any proof that there's any framework for someone to be able to pull all of these different forces together. Throughout the rest of the country, there's separate councils. That's virtually what we've got in London, so I think it's the job of central government to pull these things together.
But wouldn't a mayor provide more of a focus and be able to argue more strongly with the government than 32 London boroughs can?
Quite possibly, but it works for the rest of the country. I think it's just another level of bureaucracy.
Now, Paul, you're probably in the majority in terms of the actual referendum today. You voted yes as well. Why was that?
Well, I thought I got the impression that very few people were voting today, and it seems an interesting experiment to try and get another reconstituted mayor. So I thought to give us a try. I think a lot of people will give things a try, like they'll give Europe a try, even if they find it's not a disaster afterwards.
So who would you actually like to see as Mayor of London?
Well, I'd give Branson a chance. I think he can get things done.
What sort of things would you like to see him get things done?
Well, there are lots of things that need doing in London, and I think he would probably get things done rather than just talking about it.
What about some of you people here who also voted yes? Who would you like to see? You said Ken Livingstone. Why was that?
Well, I mean, someone who's actually going to say what he thinks, who doesn't shy away from being controversial. I think Ken Livingstone is proven to do that kind of thing. But it doesn't really matter who it is, so long as that person actually believes in London, likes London, really wants to do something for London, and is prepared to have a go. So David Mellor, Ken Livingstone, as long as it's not Jeffrey Archer, that's the only person that I'd just...
Why is that?
Well, I mean, London's a great place, so, you know, let's not ruin it by putting Jeffrey Archer in charge. But I think it's a very important job, and it's a serious, absolutely serious opportunity, because people who live in London have noticed, you know, it's got much better in the last 5 years. London's become fashionable, it's a great place to live. However, travelling around London, as Ree said, is just a nightmare. Paying council tax in one area at one rate and another area at another rate. I mean, it doesn't really make sense.
OK, well, thanks very much indeed. And with that, back to you, David, and I'm off to Brick Lane next.
OK, Michael, thanks so much. We'll join you down in Brick Lane later on. Now, let's just come back to the William Hague business, which we heard being discussed outside Tory headquarters, Norman Fowler. John Redwood, who was one of the rivals for the leadership, and you were backing another horse altogether, Kenneth Clarke, said that they chose the worst of the six in William Hague. Is that reflected in these figures tonight?
No, the figures tonight, actually are very good for the Conservative Party. They're not quite shown in the way that you're showing them on this programme, because you're concentrating on councils and whether councils are changing control or not. Now, obviously, if they're only a third of the council up, then obviously councils are not going to change control, given the position we're on. But the latest figures I've got show that we have won 209 net gains we've had so far, 209 net gains of seats. That's actually councillors being elected. Labour have lost 113 and the Liberals have lost 86. Now, that is, by any stretch of the imagination, getting to be a good and encouraging result. It doesn't mean that all the problems are over. Of course it doesn't mean all the problems are over. We've had a bad position as far as local government is concerned. We've come from a bad position in the general election. But what I would predict is that just to say this is just a runoff of the general election, a replay of the general election, that won't be shown either, because if you take some of the areas in London, if you take Wandsworth, for example, on the general election, we would go down to absolutely devastating defeat in Wandsworth. Well, let's see what that actually shows. So far, I think that what this has shown, and remember we've already had 55 net gains since the general election, so we're now up to over 250, 260 net gains since the general election. It's a step-by-step recovery of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I don't know where your information comes from. I'm not doubting it. You may be right at the end of the night. Our official score for net change at the moment is just up 48, and Labour down 19. You're confident about your prediction?
I'm confident about mine.
Robin Oakley, do you think that's a fair assessment of William Hague's position?
No, it's a considerable puzzle, I think, to those of us who spend our lives reporting politics, the public reaction to William Hague, in the sense that he does a good job in the House of Commons, he's effective at Prime Minister's Question Time, he's a better platform speaker than either Margaret Thatcher or John Major, and yet you go out in the country at a by-election or during local elections, you talk to people on the doorstep, and they say, the man's something not very polite, and I can't consider voting for him. I think the Tories have got a real job to do in selling the image of a new leader. It always takes a long time launching a new leader, perhaps harder than usual given the Blair effect and the euphoria that there has been for Labour in this first year. But I understand the Tories were doing some sort of private focus group research, and people's reactions to William Hague, they put him in a room and sort of showed pictures of him, and they said, what do you think this man does for a hobby? Oh, he goes hunting. What do you think he drinks? Oh, gin and tonic. Well, of course, those are completely false images for the kind of life that William Hague lives, and it just suggests that the country and people of political interest even don't know the man at all, and the Tories have got to get down to selling him if there's ever going to be any different kind of reaction.
David, could I just say one thing before you go?
Yeah, about his drinking habits.
One of my few distinctions is I was actually in the shadow cabinet the last time round when Margaret Thatcher was the shadow leader. We had all this at the same time. The leader isn't making impact, the shadow cabinet isn't making impact. And as a leader comes on in opposition, it is difficult to do that. You've got to have some patience with that. The Tory party has. What I'm saying is that step by step you are seeing the recovery of the Tory party. Step by step you are seeing William Hague, I think, exerting himself and asserting himself in a very formidable way, as in the House of Commons.
So, John Prescott, do you think that William Hague is going to be a real challenge in 2-3 years' time?
I think it's...
I mean, you're speaking as a professional politician about a colleague.
It is difficult for leaders to establish themselves. I think it's too early to tell. I can remember, quite frankly, when Mrs. Thatcher was first elected and everybody said, great, those on the left, she's not going to make it, we're going to win against this woman.
Can you remember when Michael Foot was elected?
Yes, and I mean, we've had all those things. I think it does take some time. But Mrs. Thatcher was really low at one stage. It was the Falklands War, and from then on, she came in the people's minds and eyes a leader. And I think her strength came from that. Hopefully we don't have to go through such an experience again for Mr. Hague, but it's something we can watch. It's something we can watch and enjoy, quite frankly, while we get on with government. And after 18 years of it, I'm quite happy to do that.
And is Mr. Prescott right to take that line, Peter, in view of what the public are saying? Do they flesh out that image, or Norman Fowler's one?
Well, I think it's always rather a mixed picture we have, David, you see. I mean, first of all, may I say, to take up Norman Fowler's point, to be fair to him, it's not just William Hague's leadership that seems to be the problem with people, it's the Tory party itself. I mean, just have a